Close your eyes. Imagine a world without music. No lullabies, no anthems, no heartbreak on piano keys. Now open them. Because 5 men were born to fight that silence. They did not belong to their time. They belonged to something deeper. Their names are etched in history, but their pain, that still plays in every note you hear. Imagine a child, not playing music, but remembering it, as if he had lived 1,000 lifetimes, and returned only to remind us how beauty sounds. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born into a world of powdered wigs and rigid chords. But he brought chaos, joy, divine mischief. At 5, he composed symphonies. At 6, he stood before kings. At 7, he traveled the world, not as a boy, but as a phenomenon. They dressed him like a doll, showed him off like a trick. But behind the charming smile was exhaustion. A boy craving love, not applause. A child who saw music in everything, even shadows. He heard symphonies in silence. He saw harmonies in the way people walked. He couldn't stop the flood of music in his mind. He begged for rest, but the melodies came, relentless, divine, like angels whispering and demons screaming. He laughed in operas, but inside he was unraveling. Mozart wasn't just a genius. He was a storm in velvet, ignored by critics, undervalued by royals, betrayed by colleagues, dying slowly from poverty, illness, and heartbreak. In his final days, he believed he was writing his own requiem for someone else. He didn't know it was his. No grave, no monument, just dirt and silence. But centuries passed, and the silence cracked. Today, his music fills palaces, movies, minds. It dances through time like a ghost that refuses to fade. You thought you knew Mozart. You only knew the name. The man was something else, something eternal. He believed music was more than sound. It was mathematics wrapped in mystery, a divine code, a language of the universe itself, and he was its scribe. Johann Sebastian Bach wasn't a performer. He was a builder, of cathedrals made not of stone, but of sound. Each fugue a sacred geometry, each canon a spiral staircase into heaven. But his world was far from divine. He was orphaned at 10, raised by a brother who copied music by candlelight. He walked hundreds of miles, barefoot, just to hear a single organist play. Not for fame, not for money, but for something deeper, something no one around him understood. He felt the divine press into his chest every time he sat at the organ. And when his fingers touched the keys, the air changed. The ground remembered. Yet no one clapped. There were no roaring crowds, just cold stone churches, unpaid wages, demands for simpler melodies. They said his music was too complicated, too dense, too strange. But he kept writing and writing and writing. Because Bach didn't write for them. He wrote for eternity, for a silence beyond death, a silence only broken by sacred sound. Each fugue is a mirror. When you listen, it reflects back the hidden architecture of your soul. You don't just hear Bach, you descend into him. He died nearly forgotten, buried without honor, his grave unmarked. But truth doesn't stay buried. A century later, Mendelssohn unearthed his genius, and the world changed. Today, astronauts play his music in orbit. AI struggles to decode it. He's in every classroom, every cathedral, every breath of structured sound. Because Bach didn't just create music, he revealed a secret, that even in chaos, there is divine order. And when you listen closely, you feel it too. They called him Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest. Fiery hair, fiery spirit, and music that didn't whisper. It blazed. Antonio Vivaldi wasn't born to follow rules. He shattered them. In a time when music was sacred, slow, predictable, he made it dance, fight, seduce, ordained as a priest, yes. But he rarely gave mass. He claimed illness. But what truly consumed him was composition, obsession. He wrote music as if running out of time. He could write a concerto in a single night, and often did. More than 500 of them, each one a firework, explosive, bold, alive. And yet, he wasn't welcome in the noble salons. Too radical, too emotional, too much. He took in orphaned girls and turned them into an elite orchestra. Blindfolded nobility listened from behind curtains, unwilling to be seen enjoying music played by women. And still, the music broke through. Then came the Four Seasons. Not just a symphony, but a map of the soul. Spring, innocence and rebirth. Summer, fever, storms, desire. Autumn, madness disguised as celebration. Winter, cold, cruel, closing in. But genius threatens power. The church withdrew its favor. Commissions dried. Fame faded. He died in Vienna, alone, forgotten, buried in a pauper's grave. But fire never dies easily. Centuries passed, and then his violins were heard again. And suddenly the world remembered. Concert halls stood in silence as his storms returned, his fire reignited, because Vivaldi never truly vanished. He waited, in every string, in every season. Now, when you hear the wind stir, the rain fall, the leaves crackle, you're hearing him. He didn't just compose nature, he translated it. And once you hear him, you never listen to silence the same way again. He heard music in everything. The creak of a floorboard, the whisper of wind, the rhythm of footsteps on cold Vienna stone. But then, one day, the world fell silent. He was going deaf, the greatest composer of his generation, trapped inside a growing cage of silence. Can you imagine? Writing symphonies and not hearing a single note. At first, he denied it. Then he raged. He slammed pianos until strings snapped. He wandered alone through forests, scribbling scores he could never truly hear. And yet, the music didn't stop. It got louder. Because Beethoven didn't write what he heard. He wrote what he felt. What he saw in lightning, in war, in love, in loss. He became a vessel. And from within that silence came thunder. His music is not polite, not courtly. It growls, it climbs, it breaks, it resurrects. The Moonlight Sonata? Not a lullaby, a scream muffled by grace. The Fifth Symphony? Not fate knocking, but fate breaking down the door. And the Ninth? He couldn't hear the chorus, but he saw the audience cry. They turned him toward the stage, so he could see what he could not hear. He wrote joy in a world of silence. No salons wanted him. No royal court kept him. He was unruly, proud, loud, but history, it bent to him. He rewrote what music could be. Not entertainment, but revolution. Not background, but awakening. He wasn't a man. He was a storm that refused to fade. Even now, centuries later, his music doesn't sit quietly in the background. It grabs your soul by the collar and demands you feel. Because Beethoven didn't need ears to hear. He heard with fire, and that fire burns still. He didn't write for orchestras. He didn't crave applause. Frédéric Chopin only needed a piano and silence. Because in silence, pain breathes louder. And Chopin, he listened to that pain, born with fragile lungs and a soul too sensitive for war-torn Europe. He escaped Poland, but never left it. Exile is not a place, it's a sound, and he captured it, in every nocturne, every etude, every sigh between notes. He didn't compose, he wept, into keys and made sorrow sublime. His waltzes weren't for dance halls. They were memories dressed in silk and shadow. His preludes, windows into ghosts, some just 30 seconds long, but each one an entire universe of aching. He coughed blood into handkerchiefs while writing masterpieces, watched love decay while his fingers spun longing into air. He lived in salons, but belonged in dreams. He looked delicate, but inside was a storm of velvet rage. Have you ever heard someone whisper their last breath into music? That's Chopin. He didn't perform like Liszt. No fireworks, just candlelight, and a heart so exposed you could hear it tremble through the ivory. He loved deeply and lost constantly. His body failed him, but his hands never did. He died young, but not before leaving behind a sound the world had never heard before, and has never forgotten since. They buried him in Paris, but cut his heart out and sent it home to Poland, encased in alcohol, like a relic, like a secret. And when you listen to his nocturnes at night, you'll feel it beating still, not in the past, but right here. Chopin didn't want fame. He wanted to be understood. And now, finally, we understand. They wrote through pain, composed in exile, died unheard. But time bends toward truth. And now, centuries later, their music still breathes, still weeps, still roars. What they left behind wasn't just sound. It was a map, a path through darkness to something eternal.